It's 10 a.m.
Let's just get down to it.
And it's time for your sports fix.
Strap yourselves in, folks.
From two guys who have covered the teams you're passionate about for years.
We are professionals.
This is Jake Scott and Ben Anderson on 97.5 The KSL Sports Zone.
Jake and Ben, 97.5 The KSL Sports Zone. Very happy holidays to everybody out there. Monday, December 29th. We are going to be with you this week without Jake. Jake is back home visiting some family, so happy for Jake to be spending the holidays with some people he loves because he hates the holidays so much. So nice for him to be able to get something good out of it. We are going to talk to Zach Shaw coming up here momentarily. He's the Michigan beat writer for 24/7 Sports and CBSSports.com. Getting a breakdown on all the insanity that has happened over the last 96 hours. Kyle Whittingham going to Michigan. Who's he bringing? Who's he taking? Who's he poaching? Who's he leaving? We'll talk to Zach Shaw about the latest there. What do they need from Kyle Whittingham? I think that's my biggest question. What does Whit have to do? Is he just there to clean up the program? Does he have to win right away? Is there a championship expectation? It's Michigan. They aren't spending that much money on him. They're spending a lot, but not top dollar on Kyle Whittingham. And is that to leave more money in the coffer to hire others to go out into the transfer portal? Big questions still ahead for Michigan. And then, of course, what does that leave for Utah? Morgan Scalley, now the new head coach at Utah, and will be the man calling his first game coming up here on Wednesday, on New Year's Eve, against Nebraska in the Las Vegas Bowl. So a very, very hectic week of sports. And not to mention the Jazz are suddenly the best team in basketball. And we will touch on that briefly at some point throughout the day. Plus, we can't overlook the biggest news. Mo Bamba leaves the Salt Lake City Stars. Who saw that coming? Probably everybody. So we will talk a lot about the movement locally in our state when it comes to college football, and, of course, keep you updated on any Jay Hill news we see if it becomes available, staying or leaving. But let's welcome him in. He is the beat writer for Michigan for 27 Sports and CBS Sports, 24/7 Sports, excuse me. It is Zach Shaw. What's going on, Zach?
Oh, not too much. Just coaching, firing scandal, and head coaching search, and then now a new head coach down in Orlando. So there's even a top 20 game going on, too.
Yeah, Zach, this is funny. For us in Utah, obviously this has been a hectic 100 hours, 4 days or so since Whit kind of emerged as the number one guy. But we were talking about the Sharon Moore stuff. I mean, this has been a huge story nationally, and then you've been on the front lines of it. How has this 2 weeks, 3 weeks been at Michigan for a program that certainly isn't without controversy, but has generally been a stalwart of consistency?
Yeah. I mean, it's certainly, you could probably point to a few scandals in the last 3 years. I mean, I was joking with some of the younger guys on the beat, just in the past couple of days, like, you guys have covered more national, crazy stories than, a lot of writers get in 20 years. So, obviously this one is not an NCAA investigation like the last couple, but still, having a coach fired for cause, then he's arrested and arraigned, and then, Michigan's thrust into a coaching search after a lot of the top options maybe have already picked their schools. And so, yeah, it's been crazy. And I think, I'm sure anyone who follows college football can kind of speak to this. The sense of urgency Michigan had too, just knowing that the transfer portal opens January 2nd. I mean, there was a lot going on. And so, yeah, I mean, I think it was Christmas night was when we first started hearing about, not just Kyle Whittingham as a candidate, but as, the guy. And so, I have to imagine people that work at Michigan, and obviously us beat writers as well. It's been a lot of, random times of the day or random days. All of a sudden you just have to drop everything and get to work. So it's been crazy, but anyone in this industry, you kind of love those rush days or those busy days a little bit too.
How do you think this process evolved to get to Whittingham? Do you think they were left with few choices? Do you think this was something they always had in their back pocket and thought, let's circle around some other names first and see if they're available? Or how did they get to Whit as the guy ultimately?
Yeah, I feel like I've heard different stories, but when Moore was first fired, Kalen DeBoer was the big name, because I know before Jim Harbaugh left for the NFL and before DeBoer left for Alabama, he had made it clear, have my people talk to your people kind of style, that he was open to the Michigan job and interested. And so, there was some chatter that if Alabama lost to Oklahoma, he kind of felt like maybe Michigan would be a better fit for who he is and what his family wants and what he wants than Alabama. But they won, and they're advancing. And as I mentioned, that transfer portal opening January 2nd, you can't really wait until Alabama's season ends to pick your coach, especially, there's a lot of good options out there. And so, I think Whittingham, I've heard different things, but I think he was always decently high on Michigan's board just because I think they wanted someone with a lot of head coaching experience. Sherrone Moore had none. And, I just think they wanted someone with a little bit more experience that had proof, that knew how to run a program. And obviously Michigan asks for different things than Utah does, but it's, two power programs, both, I think what Whittingham really stood out, once the people who, know football got to making the decision, I think, a big part of it was, okay, what's he known for? Discipline, toughness, grit, physicality. You watch Michigan over the years, that's what they want to be known for too. And when they're at their best, they usually are known for that. So I think there was I think that helped him stand out over maybe other candidates. I'm sure it didn't hurt that, there wasn't a buyout to pay. It wasn't necessarily, it's not like they were stealing someone's active head coach. So, that certainly helped his cause and his personality. We got to meet him yesterday. I get why a lot of athletic departments would be, or why he won Michigan's athletic department over. But I think the two big things were the experience and then the fact that he wasn't going to come in and try to make Michigan, Michigan's never been like a flash and dash kind of football program. It's always been, about the grit, about the defense, about the run game, about the line of scrimmage. And so I think the fact that he kind of had, pretty long track record of having those types of teams, I think that really appealed himself to Michigan.
I had thought David Shaw would have been a great choice at Michigan, specifically because he runs such a clean program and he did at Stanford. Whittingham obviously does the same thing. David Shaw is just about 12 years younger. How much does that matter right now for Michigan? Just having somebody who has zero controversy in his life, is a settled life, is not going to bring any drama with him, and is going to run a clean program.
Yeah, I think, we talked to Biff Poggi this morning, the interim head coach, and he kind of said it. He probably said it more bluntly than Michigan would want it to say. He said he's going to be an adult in the room. He's going to be someone that, obviously the track record's clean, but also years of. If you coach a Power 5 program for 21 years, like you're going to see trouble coming a little bit earlier on. You're going to see whether it's a recruit that's bad news or a staffer or an assistant coach. You're going to start to you're able to pinpoint, I think, character flaws or things like that a little bit earlier. You're going to be able to weather the storm more. You're going to know how to – and I think the big thing is, every coach wants the team to come before any individual, but you're going to know how to establish that culture before people get settled in. You're going to be able to establish that culture in who you recruit, who you hire. And so, yeah, I think, adults in the room, it's probably a mean phrase. There's just a lot of adults that work for Michigan, but I think, metaphorically speaking, I think that makes sense. I think that's fair. I think their last head coach, he was under 40 and, had a pretty significant misconduct that was highly fireable. And, and then there were other oversights that weren't necessarily violations, but it's like, yeah, you could tell they were run by a first-time head coach who was kind of learning things on the job. And Whittingham, we've already talked to players, and he's talked to the team. He can already kind of come in and establish, his credibility, his culture, the ethos of what he wants this program to be. So, I think the big difference is a guy with experience. I think he can hit the ground running, whereas someone who's, 35 or maybe an under 40 up and coming coach, there's certainly a lot of great coaches who are that kind of coach, but sometimes it does take a little bit of time to set that standard in your program. And I think Whittingham's going to be able to establish it pretty early.
Is there any mess that he has to clean up actively? Are there problems that are still lingering that need to be tied up while Witt's there, or has most of that been cleaned out before he's been hired?
I think not a huge mess. The Sherrone Moore thing, that was fairly cut and dry. The athletic department is investigating, I guess, its culture, but I don't, talking to Ward Manuel, I don't think that's going to be much of a Whittingham thing. This is really, I think the big thing is just making sure that Michigan had the youngest team in the Big Ten this year. Obviously, they had a 5-star quarterback. They had a freshman All-American wide receiver. They had 3 freshmen starting on the offensive line. If you can keep this roster relatively intact, you can probably go into next season as a preseason top 10 team. Obviously, they have to earn that to stay in the top 10. But in terms of who they're bringing back and the experience that they could have next year, I think roster retention, that's his number one job. And then I think from there, I think it's putting a staff together that's, obviously conduct, complying with the rules and all that is very important. But I also think everyone rowing in the same direction, because even before Sharon's, actual firing, we had heard about him, kind of jawing at other assistants, and there were some not fist fights, but verbal fights throughout the season. And so I think having a mature coach who's going to be able to sniff out okay, this guy's emotionally level-headed, this guy's going to react strongly to criticism, things like that. I think the staff will be important too. Roster. All the Michigan fans are talking about the roster, which players they can try to keep before that portal opens. But I think really putting the staff together, that's kind of your long-term, assembling the right kind of staff and guys you trust, but also guys that are going to push each other in the right way. Rowing in the same direction, I think is how I'd put it, because Michigan, just like all the other big-time schools, there's always a story, there's always a headline, there's always something. But if you can be unified and kind of go row in the same direction, pull your own weight. It can be good headlines too. So it's, I think in terms of the mess, I don't think he has to do a ton. He just has to put the right pieces in place and make sure the current players are bought in too. And some of that's going to be in what staff members he puts forth, in addition to saying the right things and coaching the way he can coach.
Michigan beat writer Zach Shaw is our guest. As we look at the names that you're talking about or that have been mentioned, certainly here everybody's focused on Jason Beck, which makes total sense, Utah's offensive coordinator who did a fabulous job last year, and Jay Hill, who's a former special teams coordinator at Utah and now been a great defensive coordinator at BYU. Those are the names everybody in the state of Utah is focused on. Are you hearing any other names or maybe national names that could work at Michigan that are maybe in the mix there?
Yeah, I did it a couple days ago, but I think they're telling recruits these are going to be the coordinators. I'm not trying to be the one. We'll wait until Michigan announces it. Obviously, things can change in the 11th hour with contract negotiations, but we've heard from recruits that Jay Hill is the name being mentioned, and I know Whittingham met with Bryce Underwood, Michigan's quarterback, the other day, and was kind of talking up Jason Beck. So I feel like you don't do that unless you're pretty sure those are going to be your coordinators, but. Just speaking from a macro sense, I do think he is going to have to, get other regions represented in his coaching staff. That's obviously Utah. They've got two programs that do a lot of good things, but Michigan's got to be able to recruit the Midwest. They've got to be able to recruit the Southeast. Obviously, I feel like they'll have a good shot at the West Coast. Whittingham being from California initially, but I think that'll be an interesting thing to watch, or a storyline, at least for Michigan fans to watch. Is okay. Obviously, he needs guys he can trust and guys that he knows can get the job done. And it seems like Jay Hill and Jason Beck are two of those guys. But, also if it's too many Utah guys, suddenly recruiting becomes a little bit tougher for Michigan, especially, they're real close to Notre Dame and Ohio State geographically, and those schools aren't going away on the recruiting trail anytime soon. So, I think he talked about in his opening presser, he wants coaches that represent all regions, all corners of the country. But that will be interesting. And as far as the coordinators, I would probably say 90% is how confident I am that it'd be those two. But I know they've reached out to Iowa's associate head coach and co-DC. They've reached out to a couple guys in the ACC from the offensive coordinator side of things. But hopefully I'm not speaking too soon, but I do think it's going to be those two for coordinators.
Are there any Golden Goose coaches that are at Michigan now that you think will stay around specifically because they have that Midwestern touch or special relationships with players on the roster?
Yeah, I think Tony Alford's got a really good shot. He was someone that Kyle Whittingham was specifically asked about in his opening presser. He was previously at Notre Dame and Ohio State. He's been in the Midwest for a long time. He's recruited really well at the running back position. Jordan Marshall and Justice Haynes, if they were both healthy all season, they probably both have over 1,200 rushing yards. And so, he recruits well. I think the players like him. And then obviously he's from Ohio. He's been in the Midwest a long time. So I think he's a natural fit. And then, Lou Esposito, the defensive line coach, I'm hearing they're thinking strongly about keeping him as well. He's got a lot of Midwest ties. He's a little bit younger. He isn't necessarily as established as Alford, but, he's someone that has kind of worked his way up the ranks. So he's got a lot of connections, throughout the Midwest and even a little bit in Tennessee and the South. But it was, I mean, I think in a lot of ways, it's kind of that weird awkwardness where we're interviewing coaches and we're pretty sure they were told, we talked to Wink Martindale, the defensive coordinator yesterday, and we're pretty sure he was told he won't have a job right before he spoke with us. So it's kind of an awkward thing, with this college football calendar. It's like Michigan's preparing for a bowl. These coaches are coaching and they're probably being told. I mean, Whittingham said he was honest with them and just said, this is part of the industry, unfortunately. They might have a job by Thursday. They're coaching for a game on Wednesday and they might go 10-3. But because, he wants to have his own staff and guys he has relationships with and trusts and can vouch for. I think there's going to be a lot of changes. I think, Whittingham said he'd keep 2 or 3, and I would be willing to bet Tony Alford's one of them.
Zach, are there any position groups that are particularly void? I know this is really hard to speculate about before the transfer portal, but, is there a spot where they have to bring in, new running backs next year, or do they need a backup quarterback, or do they need wide receivers? Not that that's a strength at Utah by any stretch, but are there areas where you think they need help, obviously, on the roster next season?
Yeah, I think the defensive line, Michigan, I mean, that's their bread and butter. You look in the NFL, I feel like they've got like 15 or 16 guys starting in the NFL from the edge or D-line spots, but at the same time, they're losing, I think, 7 guys, even before the portal, not even counting transfers, just, graduating or going to the NFL. 6 or 7 guys from that, the top 10 on the defensive line. So that's definitely a position where, if you're thinking about, Utah or BYU and who they might target in the transfer portal, I could see that being one for sure. D-line and edge. I think linebacker quietly could be thin. There's a couple draft decisions that Michigan has to wait on or know about. But, wide receiver, they need wide receivers. They feel like they've needed wide receivers for like 4 or 5 years. But, on defense, I think D-line and edge are probably the 2 positions. And then special teams, too. I mean, they need a kicker. They need a punter. They need returners. It was kind of a mess this year. If you can sense that from my chuckling. So, there's a couple positions, but I think in terms of, just knowing a little bit about Utah and BYU, not as much as you guys are the listeners, obviously, but D-line seems to be a mutual strength between Michigan and the 2 Utah schools over the years.
Zach, can you give us a sense of what Whit needs to do? I mean, is there an expectation that he's going to win a Big Ten title? He's going to go to the playoff. He's going to win a championship. Does he just need to be there for 2 years to settle the ground and get them to the next head coach? What do you think the actual hope is here from the athletic administration?
Yeah, I'd love to talk to some of these guys behind the scenes about it because I think with his age, obviously, and it's a 5-year contract, but I think everyone would be kind of shocked if he ever extended that contract unless it was just solely for recruiting purposes. So, I think it is kind of – I mean, the 12-team playoff does kind of put Michigan in a situation where if they don't make the playoffs, the season's just very clearly a disappointment. I think these next couple of years will be big. I mean, if he can get them to the playoffs, then it might be a situation where he's and gets them, maybe at least to where you're in the hunt on the last week of the season for the Big Ten title. I think he'll be in a situation where Michigan's like looking to him and saying, who would you like to be the successor? But if it's more 8-4, 9-3 type seasons, then, Michigan might try the search thing again, try to hope the timing's better or the circumstances are better and maybe go outside of the Whittingham tree for their next head coach. So that'll be something I'm really curious about because I think, Michigan, they need an experienced coach right now. They have, a 5-star quarterback that's from, Ann Arbor's backyard, basically. They know these next 2 years are pivotal. Obviously you can think about long-term, but really they're thinking about these next 2 years as kind of a make or break, or make or break opportunities to contend for championships. So, they hired him with that in mind. They weren't necessarily thinking they needed a coach for the next 20 years. They're thinking they need someone for the next 2 or 3 years. And then from there, then you can cross that bridge and maybe things will be calmer in terms of the NCAA investigations. You won't have, so many guys on show cause penalties, or you won't necessarily have an athletic department that's investigating its own investigation. So, I think a big thing is, obviously calm things down, clean up the mess, but But, I mean, Whittingham was pretty blunt, and so was Athletic Director Ward Manuel yesterday. They want to be in the playoffs next year. There isn't a ramp-up phase. I mean, they were, they're number, 18 in the country this year. They're 2 years removed from a national title. They want to be back on that stage. So, and they think they've got if they can keep all these players, they think they've got the players to do it. So, expectations are high, even if obviously there's a lot of off-field stuff that has to be cleaned up too.
All right, Zach, last one quickly, or as much time as you want to take. BYU has a robust donor base. They flex that muscle a lot with Kalani Sitake and Penn State. Can you give us a sense of what Michigan State has to offer when it comes to a donor base, when it comes to talent, the NIL pool, retaining coaches, hiring coaches, and how competitive they can be?
Very. Yeah, no, Michigan's got 12 billionaire alumni, and then obviously they've got lots of millionaires just with the business school, engineering program, all that stuff. So it's when they are engaged, they're probably top 5 in the country in terms of NIL funding. But I think the one thing, if I'm calling a spade, I don't think that base is always engaged. I think there's times where they're kind of skeptical of why are we spending money just to keep a player or just to keep a coach? But we saw with Bryce Underwood, he might be the highest compensated player in college football this year as a true freshman. And so, they're very when they're fired up, when they're engaged, there's a lot of money. I think the big thing is, and that was part of it too, is when they were doing this coaching search, some of these less experienced coaches that were on the hot board, so to speak, are being considered. I think they were kind of floating those by the donors, saying, "What do you think of this guy?" And I think Whittingham's experience and his track record, I guess raised more eyebrows among those with the means to have that kind of influence. So, yeah, I think when they want to be, or when they have something to sell, I think Michigan can be top 5 in the country in terms of NIL booster backing. But obviously, I think Michigan probably going to be. I would say they're a little pickier, a little bit. They need to be sold on spending that money on college football a little bit more than maybe an SEC school or some of these super gung-ho schools that were at the forefront of the NIL stuff.
Find him on Twitter at _Zach Shaw. Read him at 24/7 Sports. Zach, really great stuff. Appreciate you jumping on.
Absolutely. Thank you, guys.
There he is, Zach Shaw from 24/7 Sports and CBS Sports, giving us a breakdown on everything on the Whit front at Michigan. We'll obviously continue to break this down coming up next in the top 3 stories at KSLSports.com. Stick around. Jake and Ben, 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.
It's time to break down the biggest stories of the day. This is the top 3 stories of the day on KSLSports.com. 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.
Jake and Ben, 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone. Jake Scott out for the week. Picked another good week to be out. We will be with you every day except for New Year's, including getting you ready for the Las Vegas Bowl coming up on Wednesday. So excited to be able to do that show with you. Top 3 stories brought to you by our friends at J. Brooks Jewelers. J. Brooks, cherish your loved ones with J. Brooks Jewelers. Explore their expertly crafted engagement rings made from the finest materials. You can find them online, jbrooksjewelers.com. Christian, where are we starting today?
Number 1, BYU downs Georgia Tech in the Pop Tarts Bowl. The Cougars finished with 12 wins on the season.
Amazing that every game could have been scripted, and every game followed a very similar script. BYU comes out of the gate extraordinarily slow. I know they jumped out and got the early touchdown here, but fall behind early, down double digits going into the second half, really didn't get off the mat. You thought, oh, no LJ Martin, missing some key pieces on the defensive side of the ball. BYU is going to be in trouble, but if you had watched them at all this year, you know that it's what has Michigan fans so excited. Jay Hill's a master adjustment maker when it comes to halftime. He knows how to figure out what offenses are doing and shut them down. And then Bear Bachmeier is extraordinarily resilient. A-Rod's a very good coach, as is Kalani Sitake, and they found a way to put enough points up late to take the lead, and then Jay Hill's defense was going to step up. I mean, you could follow that script so easily throughout the season. It happened 4 or 5 times, including just, hey, BYU's probably going to leave the door open just a little bit for this team to come back, and then they're going to slam it shut with a late turnover, a sack, whatever it was. And in this case, it was the interception in the end zone. BYU beats Georgia Tech 25-21, and I think is exactly what you want to see from a bowl game. It was entertaining. Bowl games really don't matter that much anymore, but it did allow BYU to finish with 12 wins on the season.
Yeah, and you got guys like Chase Roberts, Carson Ryan going out with big performances in their last, collegiate football game. Chase Roberts gets the touchdown. Carson Ryan has his highest yardage total of his career, so good to send those guys off.
And Bear continued to look good and didn't have to run the ball a whole lot, which was nice also. He didn't have to go into the offseason banged up. I don't think he had a rushing yard in this game at all, which you kind of worry can be the default for a young player. But he had, when did we last see BYU? 2.5 weeks ago? 2 weeks ago at this point, whatever it was. So he had time to figure out his game plan. Maybe 38 passing attempts was more than we had expected, but I do think the evolution of Bear Bachmeier for the betterment of BYU is going to be more of a passer and less of a runner. You just can't run that much. If you run as much as he did throughout the year, as amazing as it is that he escaped unscathed this season, you're not going to do it for 4 or 5 seasons.
You're not going to have LJ Martin anymore.
Correct. So you're going to have to find a way to move the ball through the air. He did it in this game, 325 yards. Has to be, top 4 in total passing yards this season in his performance this year, and finishes the year just with an incredible 12-2 record, which is the only number that really matters. I don't really care about rushing stats, throwing stats, anything. I want to know what your record was. Your record speaks for itself, and BYU was 12-2, and when all the dust settles, probably going to be a top 10 team in college football, and rightfully so. I thought they had an awesome season. I thought they were cheated out of the college football playoff like everybody else, but that is the design. So BYU did everything they reasonably could outside of beating Texas Tech this year. And a tip of the cap to everybody involved. A young quarterback, a very good offensive and defensive coordinator, and an A-plus head coach who has chosen BYU over other schools. And in light of what's happened over recent weeks, that's pretty amazing that the loyalty has been there for Kalani Sitake, and BYU is reaping the rewards. So a real credit there. When good teams perform this well and show this well the way they have over the last 2 and 3 seasons now, especially with Jay Hill at the helm, you get picked apart. And the fact that they haven't previously been picked apart is amazing. And when you don't, and when you can bring back talent and you can foster talent that you do have, and then make the most of bad situations like they did with Bear Bachmeier this year, it's going to show on the field. And they did that.
Yeah, and that was a big talking point coming into this season was that Kalani retained literally his entire staff, and you can't get used to that in college football.
Especially if you win.
Right, especially if you're winning double-digit games consistently. So whatever ends up happening, these guys deserve it.
Yeah, and a great game. Good for them to go out with a W. And you know what? The Pop Tart Bowl's fun. That's a good bowl game.
It's so cool.
It's a good bowl game, and a lot of these are hokey and really don't generate, I think, the response that they hope to with their silliness or with how serious they try to be. You got to kind of pick one lane or the other. They nailed the Pop Tarts Bowl. It's in a cool area. Not that I love Orlando perfectly, specifically having lived there, but it's a great vacation town. It's warm. Players are going to be excited to be there, and the Pop-Tart stuff is funny. And who lived it up was Kalani Sitake, and that's what I love about Kalani is that you put him in those situations where it's not all ball. It's not just about football. There is a lot of nonsense involved. The trophy is a darn toaster, and he lived up to it. He bought into it, and that's what's so great about Kalani.
Especially being screwed out of the college football playoff. Like you easily, if you're Kalani Sitake, could have just been grumpy about it. I mean, Notre Dame opted out of the dang game.
Right.
Kalani could have just been grumpy and let's just get this over with so we can get to the offseason, yada, yada, yada. But you see him down in the Pop-Tart in one bite. Like, he loves this, man.
He loves it. Yeah, he could have been angry about whatever's happening with Jay Hill or what players he's going to lose. He could have been vengeful. He really could have been, and everyone, I think, would have understood it, and that's not the approach he took. And look, we're talking about him coaching young kids. At the oldest, they've got maybe a 25-year-old on the team somewhere, but it's a lot of 18 and 19-year-olds, and they are going to follow the man in front of them, and Kalani does that. And they bought in because Kalani bought in, and as long as he's there, BYU is going to be in very good shape, regardless of what happens with their coordinators, which leads us into story number 2.
Well, in case you've been living under a rock, Kyle Whittingham is at Michigan.
It's amazing. It's an amazing move. The timing is obviously extraordinarily strange, with Whit planning to coach the game coming up on Wednesday in his kind of final farewell. That's no longer going to be the case. It seems like Utah's staff is going to be picked relatively clean by Whit going with him. Jason Beck certainly seems like the obvious and front-runner name, though nothing's been announced, and maybe that'll happen coming up after Wednesday. And then with it, he will bring a series of coaches, including Jim Harding, the offensive line coach, and probably his brother, unless his brother wants to hang it up and retire, but you're getting a pretty sweet payday when you go to Michigan. All of those things undo, and this isn't Witt's fault. I'm not blaming Witt for this at all. All of these things undo the idea of having a coach in waiting. And that doesn't mean that Morgan Scalley can't do a hell of a job, or that Morgan Scalley's not a hell of a defensive coordinator and isn't as prepared for this job as anybody who's never previously been a head coach in college football. There are just things you don't know that you don't know. It's just the truth of it. Until you've been a head coach and you've handled all those jobs, and I've talked to dozens of head coaches in basketball, in football, in women's sports, all over the map. You just don't know what you don't know. And until you've gone in and done it for a couple of seasons, you don't realize how much you're responsible for when you go on the road. You know, I remember talking to Will Hardy about, he didn't realize when he goes on the road that getting people on the bus, even though it's not your job, is your job. You just have to be involved with all of that stuff. Where you're eating, who's eating where, who's coaching, you know, who's calling the staff meetings, etc. When is that going to happen? All of those things fall on your plate, and you've never done that before. But on top of it, you've got to win, and you've got to go on the field and do those things. So you've got to figure that out, and ideally, that was going to be a relatively smooth landing for Morgan Scalley, because he was going to have the offensive coordinator who Utah made a huge point about him being a part of the hiring last year. That was a huge talking point from that program last year, that he got to be a part of that he was there with Witt, picking Jason Beck to be his future offensive coordinator. And now not only does he have to replace himself on the defensive side of the ball, he's probably going to have to find a new offensive coordinator, which may involve finding a new quarterback. And that doesn't mean Devin Dampier goes to Michigan and replaces Bryce Underwood, which is still on the table if Bryce Underwood decides to hit the transfer portal, or that Bird Ficklin could do the same thing even if he recently re-signed with Utah. But just that we didn't expect this to happen to him. And this was not the situation that he had been waiting for and that Utah had been waiting to put him in. And the fact that they let this slip through the cracks, not to Morgan Scalley's fault at all. And maybe it was Witt just saying, hey, that Michigan job's open. Maybe this is my time to resign. And if I resign now and I can take that job, great. But for Utah to not play their cards better, to be able to hold on to some of these pieces, to put Morgan Scalley in the best possible place to succeed, kind of undoes the value of having a coach in waiting entirely.
Yeah, if whatever led to Kyle Whittingham stepping down, whether it was on his own accord or somebody else's, it just seems like Utah was not at all prepared for the possibility that Witt could go coach somewhere else.
Right. If he was going to leave, they thought he would leave
and retire.
Sports entirely, leave football entirely. And whether that was going to be the ambassador role that he had signed the contract saying he would do for X hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. Yeah, clearly they left a coach who felt like there was still meat on the bone. And look, I think Steve Bartle has a good article right now at KSLSports.com. I read it this morning. You can go read it about the value of having a Saturday football coach as opposed to a CEO. And Witt is certainly a CEO at this point. Witt is not doing the everyday grind of NIL, recruiting, firing up the fan base, going and getting every penny he can. And that Morgan Scalley has a better chance to do some of that. I recognize that. He also has to learn how to be a head coach, and if he can do it. He's also got to learn how to do that. And there have been insanely talented coordinators hired as head coaches that have failed. Guys with more talent and probably a greater level of success at a higher level than Morgan Scalley has shown that have not made it as head coaches. It's just a coin toss.
It's an unknown.
It's an unknown. There's too many moving pieces to be able to actually know what's going to work. Because if it did, you would never end up with a Sharon Moore. You would just never end up with those guys getting hired and flaming out so fabulously. These are human beings, and human beings are going to make mistakes. And Utah is going to have to be willing to put up with the types of mistakes that are inevitable with a first-time head coach. And Morgan Scalley is going to make them. And now he's doing that while replacing a legend and having to replace his coordinators. It's a very, very difficult spot for Morgan Scalley to find himself in. And we're going to get a first taste of it coming up on Wednesday. And like all of our local schools, I'd love to see him succeed. I don't know Morgan as well as a lot of people on this staff because he has worked with a lot of these guys previously here on our station. I have not worked with Morgan. I've talked to him more than a dozen times. Very intelligent. Obviously, the work ethic is top notch, and I think that's a major plus. But we'll see. This is not the coach in waiting job I think he thought he was going to be assuming.
No, and the way that everything has gone down, it's like, is it even worth it at this point? You know, when you're telling yourself you're going to be the coach in waiting, and like you're saying, you have a nice, smooth transition set up for you, and then all this stuff happens. It's like, okay, was it really worth it, or would you almost be better off leaving. Like, that was the threat. How long does Kyle Whittingham stick around here? And does that make Morgan Scalley search for another job? Would that almost have been a better option for Morgan at this point?
Go take a Colorado State earlier in the process, you know what I mean, and get your feet wet there for 2 years or 3 years before jumping into where you are now. This is a great job. Utah's a very good job. Utah is a high-level Big 12 job with great pay and pretty good resources, not elite, top-of-the-line resources, but pretty good resources. He will bring in talent. He will bring in good coordinators. I am curious if now with Witt being gone entirely and not being that ambassador role and not having somebody to bounce questions off of, I know people have talked about, now we can talk to Urban Meyer or whatever. Do you have to go out and hire a former head coach to be one of your coordinators, which was probably not the idea in the first place? But now, because you are lacking experience all over the field when it comes to coaching, do you have to make a decision that way? And if so, when will those decisions be made? Got to be made soon. We've got to figure out what's happening with Jason Beck. That will probably be known either before or right after the bowl game, and they will move forward from there. What's next?
Well, don't look now, but the Jazz are red hot. Back-to-back wins over the Pistons and the Spurs.
Yeah, on back-to-back nights, the Pistons the best record in the East, the number 2 record overall in the NBA, and the Spurs have the number 3 record overall. That game was on the road, and while the scoring was there from Victor Wembanyama, the Jazz shut him down. I mean, Victor looked pretty terrible in that game. He had a couple of highlight reel dunks, but did not look like a great superstar. And the hard thing about this for the Jazz now is just which direction are they going to pick? And they've just kind of continued to toe this line. There have been moments when clearly they are resting guys, and Lauri Markkanen's out with a groin strain, and Yusuf Nurkic is resting because you've got to rest when you're 31 years old and an NBA player. Kevin Love's missing half of the back-to-back night games. And the Jazz are still finding ways to win, and a lot of it has to do with how well Lowry plays when he's on the floor and how good Keontae George has become. Keontae George is truly playing at an all-star level right now and is going to be a major piece of the franchise going forward. And the fact that they have found that is enormously important, but have they done too much damage to the record early in the season to make a serious run at trying to get to the play-in tournament? And if you're not going to make the play-in tournament, why would you give the Oklahoma City Thunder a good draft pick? And that's going to be kind of the quagmire the Jazz have found themselves in. And you can't wait too long before making the decision of now are you going to really go for it and try and make the play-in tournament and see if you can win and get into the playoffs and value the playoff experience you will get for Keontae George and Ace Bailey and Lauri Markkanen and whoever's going to be on this roster going forward? Or do you pull a plug? Do you absolutely go into tank mode like you did last season? It was not what Austin Ainge said they were going to do, but I also bet he didn't think they were going to be 12-19 at this point in the season, and I think have the 9th worst record in the league, as opposed to the 4th worst record in the league, because that would have been really easy for him. The layout was there for him to pick what he wanted. So what's interesting about this with the Jazz, despite the fact that they are 12-19 and currently outside of the top 8 worst records in the NBA, I think they're sitting at number 9 right now, is that there are still teams around them that are competing. Charlotte has won 5 of their last 10. They've won 2 in a row. They are 1 game back of the Jazz. Dallas is 1 game back of the Jazz. The Brooklyn Nets with Yegor Dioman suddenly playing very good basketball. They're 7-3. They've won 3 straight. They're a game back of the Jazz. Then you look at the Clippers. Kawhi had 55 points last night. He seems like he's finally come alive. They've won 4 in a row. 5 of their last 10. They're now winning at a high level. And New Orleans is also 5-5 in their last 10, which accounts for 5 of their 8 wins. So a lot of the teams that are actually behind the Jazz that could be tanking suddenly don't seem like they have any interest in tanking either. And some of those teams, New Orleans and the Clippers, have no reason to try and lose games because they don't own their draft pick this year. So those 2 teams, if they keep winning, could surpass the Jazz, which would drop the Jazz back from the 9th spot to the 7th spot. And then you really only need 1 more team to play better than you the rest of the year to be in that 6th spot with the worst 6th worst record in the NBA. The lottery balls are probably going to fall in your favor. Not meaning you move up in the lottery, but that you don't fall past 8 and you actually hold on to your pick.
Well, bottom line, the Jazz are literally in the worst spot that they could possibly be in right now. As in, they don't have a direction. You got to push
record-wise, they are
right. You got to push all of your chips either towards the playoffs and start making that push now, or all of your chips towards tanking.
Yep.
Because if you finish the season with 9, 10, 11, there's literally no benefit, and you give your pick away to Oklahoma City.
You don't get any experience of going to the play-in tournament. You don't go to the playoffs, and you don't get your draft pick. You're exactly right. They've got to pick one, and they've got to make sure that they can firmly get there. I don't think it benefits them to continue to sit on the fence. And they know that. They're smart. They've thought about this. They stress about it. They have $1 million jobs. It's going to cause them to stress about it far more than any fan could or any media member could think about. But you have to make the decision. It's not, or this decision will be made for you. And that's a problem the Jazz don't really want to be facing. You've got to control your future. And teams do make mistakes. And the Jazz are not immune to making those types of mistakes. So we will see what approach they take here. The benefit is, and truly this cannot be overlooked, is that Keontae George has emerged as an all-star level player. And that with Lowry, and maybe Lowry no longer having to do everything, you see the level he can play at as well. And if the Jazz have two guys who can regularly score 25 points a night, you are not far away from being a serious team. And that doesn't mean you're contending, but that means you're a real playoff team. You get two of those guys, and you have the assets like the Jazz do to go out and add another piece, to go out and add a third player or several key veterans who know how to win around you. You can start winning 40, 45 games a year relatively easily because Keontae George is that good and Lauri Markkanen's that good, and we still haven't seen Walker Kessler at full strength at any point, won't this year. So those are the advantages for the Jazz. Ace Bailey, we'll see how he continues to emerge. Maybe he's the number 3 guy for them anyways. But an interesting spot the Jazz have found themselves in. Certainly not where I think the front office expected to be at this point, heading into the new year in just the next couple of days. All right, that's the top 3 stories of KSL Sports, brought to you by our friends at J. Brooks Jewelers. When we come back, we'll continue to unpack everything with Kyle Whittingham and Michigan, including Josh Furlong is going to join us coming up at 11 o'clock. Stick around. Jake and Ben, 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.
Who's got it better than us? Nobody!
Your home for the best sports coverage in Utah. You're listening to Jake Scott and Ben Anderson on 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.
Jake and Ben, 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone. Very happy holidays to everybody out there. Ben Anderson rolling solo this week, but Jake Scott will be back next week. Tough time for Jake to leave. Very, very exciting time. And I know it's unfortunately, I don't want to say ruined the holidays for a lot of sports fans, but it's put a lot of angst. There was not a real honeymoon on the Christmas season for anyone from the state of Utah, whether you're a Utah fan or a BYU fan. And I'm sure some nerves have settled. The initial news of Whit leaving. And I guess one of the elements of this that I probably didn't think about enough, and certainly you've recognized is hitting sports fans everywhere, is just that if Whit accepted another job, he was going to take everything he had with him. And I guess it just seemed like such a foreign idea that he would actually take a different job. That he would actually get one of these major jobs elsewhere. And the timing just aligned that Michigan opened up. And I don't know if we drafted Michigan in one of our best jobs draft that we did a couple of weeks ago in What You Got Wednesday. But Michigan is one of the jobs that has the resources and has the history and has the opportunity to win and is in the Big Ten and can give Whit another $40 million. And I do think that's something we need to not overlook as part of this, is that a 5-year, $41 million plus whatever bonuses are potentially out there for him that could increase. If he only stays 2 years and gets fired, he puts another $40 million in his back pocket. And I would believe that Whit said, I want a contract extension from Utah. I would absolutely believe that. If they said, Kyle, we need to know if it's one more year. Like, maybe we'll give you one more year, but we can't continue to do the open-ended thing. And if Whit said, well, if you're going to make the decision for me, then I'm going to make my own decision and I'm going to leave. I could absolutely see that being the case. And we'll have to talk to Josh Furlong coming up in about 10 minutes about what he thinks happened there behind the scenes. Because I will tell you, in full transparency, Whit stepped down, what was it, 2 weeks ago last Friday? It'll be 3 weeks ago this Friday. The Wednesday before that, I was told that Whit was coming back by somebody who I think knows. Whit is coming back, that they were going to run it back entirely. And by Friday, less than 48 hours later, behind the scenes here at KSL Sports, we were editing videos to say goodbye to Kyle Whittingham. Something changed in 48 hours rapidly, and that will come out. I don't know what it is. That will come out. That's not my beat. I'm excited to figure out what it is. But something changed, and I wonder if Whit wanted longer-term security that Utah wasn't willing to give him. And Michigan said, yeah, we'll give you $40 million. And Whit says, great, $40 million is not just generational money. It's not just my kids. It's their kids and their kids. That's going to last a long time.
Well, and coincidentally, not saying this has anything to do with why Whit changed his mind or whatever, but that same Wednesday, I think it was, or maybe it was the Tuesday before, is when Sharon Moore was fired.
Right. And I think it was the Monday.
We're going to replay Kyle Whittingham's presser with Michigan coming up at 11:30. But he mentioned, like, it just so happened that job opened up literally that same week, and that he knew that if he stepped down, he was going to be getting phone calls, but he wouldn't just pick up for anybody, but he would pick up for Michigan.
So do we think Whit saw that opportunity might present itself, and he realized, hey, I could do one more year at Utah and maybe not have control of my future, or could throw my hat here? I guess that's possible. That doesn't seem like the most Kyle Whittingham move for me, but then what over the last week has been a quote-unquote Kyle Whittingham type move?
It could be, or it could just be the fact that, he was going to step down and be this advisor or whatever at Utah, and he truly didn't have plans to go coach anywhere. It just so happened that one of the top jobs in the country was open.
And when somebody's paying you that much money, and Whit is the type of guy who really cares about who his employer is, and I believe that and respects that you've got to do best by your employer. He's just kind of a Jerry Sloan, blue-collar type of guy. When you're getting paid $40 million, if you don't want to just steal that money, you need to put together the best staff you can to win games, to show that you've earned that money, to prove that you've won. And Whit doesn't want to go and flame out at Michigan and be an embarrassment and be an absolute flop and have that be the end of his career. Whit wants to win. Whit's a competitor. So I don't blame him for wanting to put together the best staff that he can. And in his eyes, apparently, that's Jay Hill and Jason Beck, and we'll see if he's able to close the deals on both of those players. I thought it was really interesting talking to Jake Shaw in our first segment. If you missed that interview, it'll be up shortly at KSLSports.com. That Zach said that the players have already talked about specifically Jason Beck and Jay Hill as the coordinators. That they have kind of been led to believe that is who they're going to be playing for, to influence their decisions on whether or not to enter the transfer portal.
Portal opens Friday, I believe.
Yeah.
So whether or not those decisions are officially announced before then, I would think they have to be announced before then. We will see. But, the players have to have some sort of sense. You've got Bryce Underwood, 5-star true freshman last year. That's a big fish, and they want to do everything they can to hold on to him.
And, it's not just the transfer portal of who from Michigan leaves. It's who can Michigan go get. When that transfer portal opens, Jay Hill, if he's the guy, or, let's just say Kyle Whittingham because he is the guy, Whit's got to go fill some holes. Whit's going to have to fill gaps on this Michigan roster of guys who are either leaving or guys who are graduating or he doesn't want back. He's going to have to figure that out. I'm sure he's already watched every Michigan game from this season and is familiar with the roster because Whit's a sicko, and that's what head coaches have to do. Let's talk more about it with Josh Furlong coming up next. Stick around, 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.
The sports you love, the teams you can't live without.
Get a sense of urgency!
This is Jake Scott and Ben Anderson on 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.
Jake and Ben, 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone. A very happy Monday to everybody out there. Let's welcome in our next guest. You can read him at KSL.com. You can find him on Twitter at JFurKSL. It is Josh Furlong. What's going on, Josh?
What's going on, Ben? I'm doing well. How about you?
Crazy weekend. I'm sure your weekend was crazier than just about anybody's being on the front line of this. What was your initial thought Friday when we saw the reports early Friday morning that Whit had kind of been not signed yet, but singled out as the guy Michigan was keeping an eye on?
Yeah, but by the time it came to that point where you get the Pete Samuels or the Ross Dellingers and all those other guys tweeting out that he's the target, it kind of felt like a done deal. They generally don't stick their necks out for something like that unless they feel really confident. Things change, obviously, like we saw with Kalani Sitake. But I think at that point there was enough interest there that it made sense. So I think just going into this, there never really felt like this was going to be a reality, just because I don't think Michigan was really looking toward his way, because I think they thought he was legitimately retiring. And then, you make that call and suddenly see that there is interest. And so it was interesting to kind of see this all play out. I think Michigan is one of a handful of schools that Kyle would have answered. I genuinely believe that he was intent on just kind of taking a year off, seeing where things went. And then if he wanted to get back in coaching, he'd do it then. But, this came at the perfect time. And why not jump at an opportunity like that to kind of prove to yourself that you still got the chops to coach at a high level.
Do you think he mentioned the 5 jobs? You mentioned the 5 jobs. Do you think it has more to do with that being the job, or Whit specifically saying, I still want to coach and I would have been happy to be coaching, whether that's Utah or somewhere else?
Yeah, I think he still wanted to coach, right? I think going into the end of the season, on the day of his deadline, the intent was that he still wanted to coach at Utah. And then there just came a decision, you know what, I just kind of need to move on. I need to move on and give Scalley the job. And so, I think there was still always that desire but there was never really an intent to pursue a job, if that makes sense, right? Like, I don't think he left expecting to go get a job. It was more, if something came along, then he'd do it. And this just came at the perfect time where, 2 days later, suddenly you have this crazy scandal and a dream job of sorts decides to come open. So, I think the timing, it feels a little weird. And, a lot of people feel like Kyle was pushed out. But at the same time, this really was just something where he was intent on kind of stepping away, even though he still had a desire to coach and wanted to keep going. It's just there comes a point where you kind of have to rip that Band-Aid off and say, look, I could keep going forever, but I do need to go spend more time with family and I need to do this. Oh, wait, now this perfect dream job opened up. Now I got to go take it.
So in a lot of ways, this is not the worst case scenario for Utah, but it's not a good one, right? Morgan Scalley takes over. That's great. That's the guy they wanted. But ideally, and they started this conversation last year, he was going to have Jason Beck there. I mean, he helped hire Jason Beck and pick that quarterback, and maybe Devin Dampier comes back, and maybe Bert Ficklen's back. But the idea was for this to be a pairing. Morgan's defense, Jason Beck's offense, and that doesn't look like that's going to be the case anymore, though nothing's official. What type of a setback is this for the Utes?
Yeah, I mean, that's the biggest thing that hurts this, right? Like, Kyle walking away is not really a big deal because he was already leaving. And so, like, the expectation for the recruits, the players on the team is that this is the way it was going to be set up with Morgan Scalley. Jason Beck had just signed a new contract. You're going to bring, a new DC in, which is somebody internally. And so everything was going to kind of consistently move. You're going to still lose guys to the transfer portal as you do, but everything was going to kind of exist in this same vacuum of consistency. And suddenly now you have a head coach that was your, former head coach. And now he's said one thing where he's going to, leave the program in a good situation and everything's going to be good. And then suddenly you're going to kind of raid the cupboards and take some of the best assets from the team. So, this is a much more difficult situation for Morgan Scalley. At the same time, Morgan is preparing for all of this, right? Like, he understands the situation. He's not just sitting on his hands. And so he's moving very quickly to try to make sure that he has, people in place just in case something happens. Obviously the preferred option is to keep Jason Beck and maybe you can get some boosters that want to keep him or you want to do things that help. But if you lose him, you lose him, right? Like, it's a 1-year thing. Like, I don't want to sit here and say that Jason Beck's the only thing that's going to keep Utah alive. But I think for stability's sake, this is a big blow to Morgan just because you could lose Jason Beck and then how many players follow him because they like his system. So I think that's where the stability comes more or less than anything. There's obviously some other position coaches that are up on the table as well, but Beck is going to be a bigger loss in a lot of ways if he does, in fact, go to Michigan.
What type of a network do you think Morgan Scalley has? That was really a flaw Whit always had. Whit did not have a big network. He did not have an ability to go out and tap better offensive coordinators when they had struggles on the offensive side of the ball. I think that hurt with recruiting somewhat. Do you know about what Morgan Scalley can do on that front and how different it might be from Kyle Whittingham?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, these two are completely different in that regard, whereas Kyle was much more introverted, wanted to just be the football coach, didn't really want to get involved in, the relationship side of things. Not that he wasn't good with relationships, but he didn't want to go out of his own comfort zone to build relationships with other people. Whereas Morgan Scalley, he's going to various coaching conferences. He's connecting with a lot of different people. It's still early to see what that actually will mean in terms of hiring and if he can bring a lot of different people in, but he's much more of a connecting guy, right? Like, he wants to go out there and connect with different people, talk to them. He goes out every single year and he'll go visit various programs and try to see how they do certain things. He wants to find little wrinkles that he can utilize in his own system and his own game as he prepares for not just the defensive side of the ball, but for his own thing. So, he's been pivotal in recruiting. Everybody loves him because of his connections. He remembers you. He wants to be your friend. This is a different kind of mindset with Morgan where he's going to be all in on that. And he may not necessarily have the biggest repertoire of coaches right now simply because of his little bubble that he's in as well, but he's at least expanded himself to other areas outside of, Utah that allows him to be able to have those connections that Kyle just simply didn't have.
Not that there's been a ton of coach in waitings, historically there have certainly been several, but it's not super common. But generally, we do see guys step into a new role and they want to spread their wings a little bit. They kind of want to try some things that the last guy didn't do. And sometimes that's a real mistake and sometimes it can be successful. Do you get the impression that Morgan Scalley wants to do things considerably differently than what Witt did? Or can you imagine any changes he might be willing to make?
Yeah, I mean, there's going to be differences in kind of how he operates, especially on the recruiting front. How roster building, kind of management side of things, where it's more of, I wouldn't call it the pro model per se, but I think it's looking at the evaluation of guys and saying, okay, what are you worth? Doing things that way, kind of showing it so that there's kind of a consistent base in terms of NIL and different things that way to help create some consistency there. So on the recruiting front, there's some of that stuff. On the X's and O's types of things, his defense isn't going to stray too far from what we've seen, obviously. But on the offensive side of the ball, he wants to air it out more. He wants to have this much more of a pass-friendly game. That's not to say that he's going to abandon the run. He understands that needs to happen. But I think you're going to see a shift in kind of offensive personnel, offensive, strategy, probably lean more into like what Beck did this year in terms of wanting to open it up, even though Utah didn't pass the ball around a ton. But there's going to be a lot more chances, a lot more risk-taking, just in trying to be able to move the ball, right? Like you got to score points and you got to see that you can't just milk the clock and let teams come back. You've got to go, step on their throats, figuratively speaking, and go in there and try to score as many points as possible. So I think you're going to see a little bit more aggression from Morgan on that side of the ball. But I mean, most of the stuff is going to stay relatively the same. Morgan would be crazy to try to change everything, try to change the culture. That culture is Morgan Scalley. He's been a Utah man forever. And so that's everything that he knows. So I think majority of that stuff is going to change, but there are going to be some definite wrinkles that you're going to see that's going to change. He may open it up a little bit more, allow more, fan involvement. Maybe it's more media involvement. There's going to be a little bit more openness that Kyle just simply wanted to restrict because he wanted to focus on just football.
A hypothetical. Jason Beck leaves, Bryce Underwood stays, so they don't need a new starting quarterback. What does that mean for Utah's quarterbacks? And then the fallout from that is, what does it mean for the coordinator Utah hires? Who's driving the bus? Is it Devin Dampier? Do you have to hire a quarterback or a coordinator that fits what Devin Dampier does? Because he's a little bit specific. Or do you bring in a coordinator who has his own guy and you kind of move on from what the offense looked like last season?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like, if Beck leaves, there's a high probability, 90%-ish that the Devin Dampier actually leaves. There's been a lot of talk from his side of the aisle of wanting to go somewhere else, whether that is Michigan, there's been Arizona State talked about. So there's a high probability that Devin Dampier doesn't even suit up for Utah next year. And so from that end, you're going to be looking more at Bird Ficklin. Now, if Underwood leaves Michigan, there could be even a high probability that both quarterbacks leave, though, turning down a starting role at Utah is, very, very tough for Bird. So I think, you can rely more on Bird. If you keep Devin Dampier, that's great. But I think you're going to have to rely on kind of his understanding of things, what he wants to do. I don't know that you fully want to just put a whole offense on one player, but I think they're going to have a say, right? They're going to have an understanding of what's going to go on, because if they don't like that offense, you're going to lose them. So, I think Morgan is going to be heavily involved in talking to either or both of these quarterbacks and having a say. But by the sounds of it, Morgan already has some guys picked out that he wants. There's been a lot of talk of his connection with Aaron Roderick at BYU and wanting to bring him back to Utah. Maybe Aaron wants to be able to have that connection again and come back to Utah under different circumstances. I know it didn't work necessarily under Whittingham, but maybe it will under Scalley. But there's other offensive coordinators that are kind of in that realm that Scalley has already started to be talking to. He's being prepared. There's guys that he's ready for should Jason Beck leave. So, there's going to be a lot of conversations had. There is a lot of conversations being had right now here down in Las Vegas. But, it's not something that's catching Morgan by surprise by any means.
I've seen some fan base, and this is all on Twitter, so it's completely inaccurate. But I know some parts of the fan base think that, this is really going to rally the donor base. Getting a new fresh face, that's going to excite and encourage people to open their wallet. I've seen it on the other side in business. people are loyal to the people they know, and everybody knew Whit, and that probably made it for a safe bet for a lot of donors that they were happy to give Kyle Whittingham money because Whit generally did good things with it. They won, and he didn't make a lot of mistakes. What do you think happens with this donor base with an entirely new staff under Mark Harlan and what this is going to look like for the football program specifically?
Yeah, I mean, I think you still get a consistent amount of your donors that want to donate to the program. So that's going to stay. But I think you're unlocking a different side of this where Kyle didn't always want to fully kind of schmooze and get involved with the donors. He did because that was part of his job, but it wasn't what he loved. And so, it may not be immediately great right now, but I think Morgan's the type of coach that's going to go in there and put in the hard work to be able to do that and trying to get new donors that maybe Utah hasn't really attracted or maybe they felt slighted. I don't know that was necessarily a big thing because Whittingham was attracting some good donors, but I think there's just a different potential here because Morgan wants to be more involved in that kind of thing. With that said, though, I think there is Morgan would have had a good donor base, but I think now the way that Kyle Whittingham is going about what he's doing and potentially taking some Utah players or coaches, that's going to rally some people to say, hey, we got to support Morgan because Kyle just kind of gutted us, so to speak. So, it can be a blessing in some respects because now you get additional help from people that have the money to do so. But, it's still TBD, right? I mean, I think like what you said previously there's just not a lot of head coaching waiting opportunities to kind of see how this works. Most haven't done very well. With that said, I think the way that Utah kind of crafted this and the fact that Morgan's been involved with this program for, forever kind of shows that there's a little bit more consistency and track record that allows them to work. And I think part of that still goes with the fan base, with the donors and everything, trying to build up a program that proves, hey, look, he is a Utah man. He's a guy that's not going to leave if you just trust in him.
Josh, do you think, how does it feel in Vegas right now? I mean, you talked about what the team feels like or just the fact that they are down there getting ready for a game coming up 48 hours from right now. Is it chaos? Does it feel like it's in a free fall? Is there excitement? How do the players feel? How do the people around the program feel right now?
I don't get a sense that there's chaos per se. I mean, I think going into this game, there was always the understanding that Morgan was taking over. If anything, it just shifts the fact of, hey, instead of we're going to go win one more for Kyle Whittingham, we're now going to go win one for Morgan Scalley in his first game. But kind of the little interactions that I've had down here and the people that I've talked to, there doesn't feel like there's anything earth-shattering. Nothing's really changed. If anything, it's more for the coaching staff and kind of what that could be. I don't know that a lot of these players are necessarily going to be attracted suddenly to Michigan because, Kyle's there. It could happen. That's, who's to say that Michigan would even want some of these players? It's hard to say, but I still think a lot of these players, it's business as usual. And quite honestly, they're in Las Vegas, so there's a lot to distract them. There's a lot of things for them to do right now. And, I may or may not have seen a few having some fun last night. And so I think it's
Wait,
one
what
of
were
those
you
things
doing, Josh? Where were you having fun that you saw these people?
Look, I'm in a hotel with some tables, so you can put one and two together.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, all right.
So yeah, I mean, I think it's just that. I think it's everybody's just kind of going business as usual, and they're in Vegas, they're having fun. The rest will fall out after on Wednesday, and for now, live up and try to get that 11th win.
If Whit had come back and Jason Beck was back, and that meant Dampier and Bird Ficklin were back, I would imagine we were expecting a 10-win season and a team competing for a Big 12 championship appearance last season. What do you think is fair to expect? Again, I know you've got to hire coordinators. You've got to figure out who your quarterback's going to be. It's a reset. Utah's truly hitting the reset button right now. Is it just get a sense of what the team is next year? Does that have to be the expectation? Is it try to get to a bowl game, or do you think it has to be higher than that?
I think it can be higher than just get to a bowl game. And I think when you look at Utah's schedule, it's probably weaker than even this year. Now that's assuming that some of these teams that have been down stay down, or the transfer portal doesn't completely, shift things. But I think Morgan, has probably the easiest opportunity to be able to jump into this year because of that schedule. Now that's assuming that you can get all these pieces to gel, right? I think one of the beauties of this year is that Utah did a really good job last year in the transfer portal of bringing in guys that bought into the exact same system, and they bought in together. It was a much better opportunity than just trying to find, top tier talent at certain positions and trying to get them to gel. They did a much better job of trying to get everybody to gel together. If Morgan can do that, I believe that 8 wins is maybe your floor. That's easy to say right now here in December and not knowing what the roster makeup will be. But I think the schedule playing out the way that it is, I think gives Morgan a little bit of an upper hand in being able to do what he needs to. It's still so early to see what that could be, knowing that we don't know who's going to stay on staff. We don't know what players are going to be around, and you could lose some key pieces that could absolutely be detrimental to the program. What
are you expecting Wednesday? Do you have any idea what to expect now with everything that's transpired over the last 96 hours?
Man, that's what's so crazy about these games. And then you throw in all that kind of stuff, and it just becomes a challenge. I still think Utah has the upper hand here. They've got their full complement of players. Devin Dampier is going to play. Jason Beck is still calling the offense. The defense is still under Morgan Scalley for all intents and purposes, and there's good belief that Colton Swan will be the next DC, and he's going to be helping calling plays, on Wednesday. So I think there's a good base of consistency there, and I don't expect there to be a lot of drop-off outside of guys just not showing up. Maybe they lived up to Vegas a little too much. I don't get that sense. But I think the hard part of that is you just don't really know what Nebraska is going to bring. They've got so many different changes that it could be a completely revitalized team that is still really solid. They were really good this year until they had to change quarterbacks and had some injuries. And so I think there's some unknowns there that really make it tough to understand what Nebraska is. But, if Utah comes in and plays their game, I have to imagine that this is a win for Morgan. It's a win for Utah. But anything can happen in these types of games, especially when, the effort level can be changed depending on where guys' mindsets are at the time.
Find him on Twitter at JFurKSL. Find all of his coverage of the Las Vegas Bowl over the next 48 hours and more, plus the fallout with Jason Beck, Kyle Whittingham, and more. Josh, really great stuff. Thanks for jumping on.
Appreciate it, Ben. Have a good one.
There he is, Josh Furlong, giving us a breakdown on the latest with Utah, and obviously I think maybe the comment there, the soundbite from Josh there, that he thinks there's probably a 90% chance that Devin Dampier is not back at Utah, whether that's because he goes somewhere else in light of Jason Beck leaving, he goes to Michigan, goes to Arizona State, goes somewhere else. I think that's pretty fascinating because then you're starting from scratch. And I know Jake and I talked a lot about, Bird Ficklin or Devin Dampier going forward, and who do you want and who do you root for and who do you think is the better player if you're a Utah fan. If you're bringing in a new coordinator, I think all of that even goes out the window. If it's not just going down to, well, who do you have $1 million to spend on your starting quarterback next season for? Where's that resource being directed? If you're bringing a new coordinator and you want him to succeed, Bird was really good. I thought Bird was an excellent player. His home run ability is pretty impressive. I thought his upside was higher than Devin Dampier, though we didn't see a healthy Devin Dampier. It didn't feel like this season. If you're bringing a new coordinator, just let him bring in his own guy. That would be my opinion there. Being committed to a backup quarterback who had a pretty good freshman season, it's probably not worth building your program around going forward, especially if that's going to influence who you hire as your offensive coordinator.
Yeah, you're better off picking the coordinator, right, not the quarterback.
Yeah.
Because the quarterback is only here on a finite timeline.
Yeah, could leave after the season. Could get hurt with his style of play. That's just it's such a bad decision to hire a coordinator based on what a run-heavy quarterback does after one season as the backup.
And who's to say the coordinator doesn't leave right after a year like Jason Beck did?
Absolutely.
But it is, if you're going to hit the reset button, you might as well just hit it.
And that doesn't mean you don't welcome Bird back. No pun intended. A bird in the hand is worth a lot. Bird is a good player. Having a good quarterback is the single most important thing Morgan Scalley could have next season. If you want to win games in college, you have to have a good quarterback. And maybe Bird's the guy. Maybe Bird's the best available to Utah's program. If Bird had this season somewhere else and was transferring into Utah fans would have been really excited. And so if you can keep him, I'm not saying, throw the baby out with the bathwater at all. But if you are talking about long-term success, I don't think you can let that specifically drive your decision-making, especially if you're Morgan Scalley and you're trying to set up. Look, Morgan's not going to have an infinite leash. Morgan's going to have to win relatively quickly. It's not going to be year one, but he's going to have to win relatively quickly. Otherwise, names like Jay Hill, if they become available, whether Jay goes to Michigan or not, is going to be important. They're going to be names that Utah looks at to make sure they're winning if Morgan Scalley doesn't do it. So that's going to have to be a key decision in what he makes coming up this offseason. Such a tough spot for him to be in. I don't envy him other than the fact that he's got a great job as the head coach at Utah, which is a very good program with a rich history and is very well respected. We will let you hear from Kyle Whittingham himself, specifically from his introductory press conference coming up next. I haven't heard all of it. I bet you haven't either. But some good stuff coming out from Whit as the new head coach at Michigan. Stick around. Jake and Ben, 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.
Whether it's the Jazz, Utes, Cougars, or Aggies, these guys have got you covered.
Time to eat, fellas.
You're locked on to Jake Scott and Ben Anderson.
1, 2, 3, move it.
On 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.
Jake and Ben, 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone. Very happy Monday to everybody out there. All right, I'm very excited to hear this. I saw clips, obviously, and I heard parts of it, but I haven't sat down and listened to it mostly in full. We don't have time to play the full thing, but Kyle Whittingham was just announced as the head coach at Michigan over the weekend and had his first press conference discussing his priorities, his move on from Utah, and what he hopes to do with the Wolverines. Here's Kyle Whittingham talking to the Michigan media.
All right. I'm operating on about 4 hours sleep in the last 3 days, so if I'm a little bleary-eyed, I apologize. But I can say without question what an honor it is to be here, what a privilege it is to be able to coach this football team, the University of Michigan. Just a place that just reeks of tradition, academically, as good as anybody in the country, resource-wise. So many things here at University of Michigan that are just absolutely top-notch. One of the top universities in the world, and so it's an honor to be able to be in this position. Like I said, 21 years at Utah. Stepped down a couple weeks ago. Wasn't sure if I was finished or not. I still had a lot left in the tank, but I knew that there was about, you can count on one hand the amount of schools that if they called, I would listen and I would be receptive to what they had to say. Michigan was one of those schools. Definitely a top 5 job in the country, without a doubt. And so when the ball started rolling and the more I learned about Michigan, the more excited I got. And I'm just elated to be here. I had a chance to meet with the team last night. Great group of young men. They're eager. They were excited to have a head coach named. I mean, they were without a coach for a little bit, and so it was good for them to put a face to a name. And I'm going to be meeting with all those players individually over the course of the time I'm here at the bowl site. And can't wait to get back to Ann Arbor. I guess we call it the A2. Get back to the A2 and begin working with these young men. Putting together an outstanding staff. Can't give you any names right now. There's guys that are still working bowl games and playoffs and so forth. And so, but that will be forthcoming. And, like I said, I just can't say enough about how myself, my family, my wife is excited to be here. I'm a grandpa of 11 kids, 11 grandchildren, so they're all excited. I got some 8-year-old grandsons that are instant Michigan fans, and they've been playing college football now, and they've changed their team to Michigan on the college football game. But anyway, one thing you'll learn about me is I don't like to talk a lot, and so I'm would field questions, anything you got to ask, I'm here for you. But I'm one of those rare college football coaches that doesn't like to hear himself talk. And so go ahead and ask any questions here. Let's get started with that.
All right, we'll get started with some questions. If you do have a question, raise your hand. I'll call on you. And we'll go for a little while here, and then we'll do a little bit of one-on-one for a few minutes before they have to go to practice. So we're going to start. I know, Aaron, you raised your hand to start, so we'll get started with Aaron McMahon.
Kyle, Aaron McMahon, the Ann Arbor News, MLive.com. Nice to meet you. What made the Michigan job so appealing to you, and then what are some of your first priorities here?
Well, what was appealing was the obvious. I mean, it's Michigan. I mean, that says it all. I mean, Michigan and all that entails, the tradition, the big house, it's one of the most storied programs in all of college football. So that was a no-brainer. One of the top 5 jobs, as I mentioned, in the country. The second part of that question was?
Immediate priorities.
Immediate priorities. Okay, roster retention. Meeting with these young men. In this day and age of college football, transfer portals opening up in about 5 days. That is absolutely job one, is to make sure that get a chance to get in front of these young men and tell them what I'm all about, find out what they're all about. And that would go for the incoming recruits as well. Got to get on the phone. They're not here physically yet, but get on the phone with the class that we just signed. Outstanding class, by the way. I believe it was ranked number 12 in the country, and a lot of good young players in that class, and can't wait to get, I think, about half of them, maybe a little over half of them will be here at the break and enrolling with us for the winter conditioning and spring football. So that is job one, without a doubt. Is it's all about players. College football is all about players, and if you got good players, you got a chance. And so retention of the players in the program and retention of the players that we just signed. That's the absolute priority.
Stay on the left, Tony.
Yeah. Hey, Kyle. Tony Garcia, Detroit Free Press. Pleasure to meet you.
Okay.
How would you've been a long tenured coach, so a lot of people are familiar with your style, but if they weren't, how would you describe to the Michigan fan base the type of team that you'd like to build?
Well, I think our team will fall right in line with what Michigan is used to. Michigan football, all the way back with Coach Bo Schembechler, who, by the way, when I was 7 years old, I'm sitting in my living room watching a football game by myself, and it just happened to be Michigan versus Ohio State, and I saw those winged helmets come out of the tunnel, and Bo Schembechler leading them and playing against Woody Hayes, and I was hooked. I was hooked at that point, and so I've been, and that's the honest truth, So I've been watching Michigan football and following it for years. But what you can expect, physicality will be our calling card. At University of Utah, the place I was, we were the most physical team in the league. Whichever league we played in, that's not going to be any different here. And I believe in running the football. We were second in the nation last year rushing the football at Utah, and defending the run. If you can get those, if you can win the line of scrimmage, all right, and be physical up front, you've always got a chance. And so that will be the trademark and the identity of this football team is physicality, toughness, and grit.
Back left, Andrea.
Andrea Adelson, ESPN. Kyle, you stepped down at Utah.
Mm-hmm.
When did you hear from Michigan, or how quickly after you did that? And then as the counterpoint to that, you weren't sure if you were done coaching. Did you expect it to be within weeks of stepping down?
Well, I didn't expect that. I did not expect that. And it was, ironically enough, the timing was almost exactly the same when I stepped down and when this job became open. It was within a day or so of each other. And so, like I said, when I stepped down, I felt like one thing I didn't want to be is that coach that just stayed too long at one place. In 21 years, you say, well, you did stay too long. But we ended up 10-2 this year, and I thought, this program is in a great place right now. Great, excellent players, excellent coaching staff. I was able to hand the torch to my defensive coordinator, Morgan Scalley, who's an outstanding young football coach, and I just felt that the time was right to exit Utah. But like I said, I still got a lot of energy, and felt like, hey, if the right opportunity came, then I would be all in on that. And so that's what Michigan afforded me.
Come over to the right here, Clayton.
Clayton Safety with Wolverine.com. Coach, you talked about retaining players and the transfer portal opening. Is it exciting, the level of resources that you'll have here at Michigan to do those?
Absolutely. We got excellent resources here. The NIL, the rev share, all of what college football is today is right among the top tier of the universities in the country. Very competitive. It's always a work in progress. You're continuing to try to build those resources, and that's another, other than the retention of the players, that will probably be job two, is making sure that we get with the right folks and get the resources that we need to put that roster together and build it from there. So.
To the side there, Isaiah.
Hi, Coach. Isaiah Hole, Wolverines Wire and Locked On Wolverines. You spoke about trying to assemble a staff, and I know you can't mention any names, but what's your philosophy as far as bringing guys in? Are you looking to try to have any kind of balance with anyone that's already kind of in the administration, or?
Yeah, well, first of all, you got to bring in guys that you're familiar with and you trust and you've worked with. I think that's always a starting point. I've had some good resources. Urban Meyer, I don't know if that's a four-letter word in this room or not, but Urban and me are very tight. Got some counsel from him. He's been a few places, and the key is to get guys in that you trust, get guys in that you're familiar with, that do things your way, know what I expect, what my expectations are. But at the same time, I'm not precluding the the chance that we will keep some coaches from the current staff. There's some excellent coaches on the staff right now, and I'm going to tell you that most likely there will be a few faces that stay on and help bridge that. It's much easier to be in the staff room and meeting and say, hey, I wonder how they do this here. And if you got a guy right there that's done there, been there, done that's a big help. So I would anticipate, of the 10 full-time coaches, 7 or 8 new guys and 2 or 3 holdovers.
On the right here, Angelique.
Hi, Angelique Scalley from the Detroit News. I was just curious, was there any hesitation on your part? A lot of people say, oh, you got to hire a Midwest guy to coach a Midwest school, and I had to follow up on what do you think of Ohio State? That's sort of an important topic.
Well, I think they got a good football team, and they're in the playoffs, obviously, and they're very talented. But I would say that I'm just excited about the opportunity here. I got distracted. Tell me the thrust of your question again.
Sorry, I distracted you. I just, a lot of people say, well, you got to hire.
Oh, Midwest. Yeah, that's right. There is some truth to that in a way, but Michigan is going to cast a wide net recruiting coast to coast. And so I've got a lot of contacts, particularly out west, but also in Florida, Texas. We're going to have some coaches on the staff that have worked, in the ACC and out this way in the Midwest, and so I think that might be overrated a little bit as far as geographically where you come from. But I can tell you right now that we will have a staff that is very diverse and has roots in many different places in the country. But again, a school like Michigan is going to recruit the top athletes from East Coast to West Coast, so we got to be able to do it all.
The gentleman in the back in the green shirt.
Hi. What type of culture do you want to build in the locker room here at Michigan?
Family culture, without a doubt. It's a situation where I believe in family. I've got an adage that as coaches, we love the players love each other. And if we can get that done in the locker room and make sure we have a genuine love for each other, then you're halfway home. Also a team culture, it's all about the football team. There is nobody above the team. And got to have everybody buy in, that everybody, including myself, need this team more than this team needs them. And if we got everyone on that page and understanding that concept, then that's going to be a very positive thing.
How do you fit that into when this day and age?
Tougher and tougher each year. It becomes more challenging. There's no doubt about it. Roster turnover, some teams are turning over 70% of their roster every year, and so that's a challenge. I would at Michigan it's a little less than that. We don't have as much turnover. I think the retention is very good here, but the key there is the players that are here and understand what we want, what the culture is. They're responsible to set the standard for the guys that are coming in. And another thing that I believe strongly in is that you will become us. We will not become you. As far as the players that are coming in, you will become us and do things the way that we do things.
On the right in the middle there, Doug.
Coach, every coach has expectations no matter where they are. How do you think they'll be different here at Michigan than what you faced before?
Well, Michigan here is playoffs. I mean, you got to get to the playoffs. That's our expectation. That's my expectation. Big Ten championship. Obviously will get you to the playoffs. But if you can get to that 10-win mark, that usually is a pretty good indicator that you will be in the playoffs, especially when they expand, which is going to happen at some point soon. And so that's the bar. I mean, the University of Michigan. How can it be any different than that?
And just to be clear, do you dislike Ohio State, or is that something you have to learn how to do?
I do now, I guess, but like I said, I followed them for quite a while. Me and Urban were on the same staff at Utah. I was his defense coordinator, so there was a real tight bond there, and I followed his career and obviously stayed in touch throughout the course of his career, and he had great success there. But now I'm on the right side of the deal now. So, yeah.
In the back left, Sam.
Sam Gibson, Michigan Daily. You mentioned you're going to have some one-on-one conversations with players in these upcoming days. What is your role going to look like during the bowl game? I'm
going to try to stay out of the way. These guys have been coaching these guys the whole season. I'm excited to be around, observe. but I'm going to stay in the background. And excited to start meeting with these players. I already met with one player. You can probably guess who that was, our quarterback, Bryce Underwood. That was a great conversation. Spent about 45 minutes with him this morning. But mostly evaluating, meeting individually with players, on the phone to the recruiting class, making sure they get to know me and feel comfortable out coming in. And during the game, I'll be up in the box, out of the way from the coaching staff. And I did meet with the coaching staff as well, by the way. And, just was brutally honest with them that, hey, they're all experienced coaches. They know the deal. What really sucks is you can win 9 games, possibly 10, and be out of a job. I mean, that's just the reality of the profession. It's unfortunate, but that's the reality of it.
Gentleman on the aisle.
Yeah, Jay Drew from the...
Jay Drew, how you doing, buddy? All the way from Salt Lake.
Happened to be in town last
Oh, just happened to be in here. Okay, great. That's right.
Kyle, pardon me for asking about Utah again, but given all that you accomplished as board manual just laid out for everybody at Utah, do you feel like you were treated fairly by the university in the last couple of weeks?
Yes, I have. The administration of the university, for my entire time there, has been very supportive, and they treated me well. Again, it was my decision to step down, and I just felt again that the time was right. And I've seen too many coaches hang on too long, and just gosh, why didn't I retire 2 or 3 years ago? That type of deal. And so, in fact, I contemplated stepping down before last season, but we had such a frustrating season. We were our 5th quarterback at the end of the year, and just so frustrating that I just could not end on that note. And so came back and righted the ship, so to speak, and we got back on track. But no, to answer your question, the university treated me nothing but good during my time there. The community, we had 100 straight sellouts and counting, and the support, and it was just a very enjoyable ride in Salt Lake City.
There was Kyle Whittingham during his introductory conference at Michigan. Good question there from Jay Drew, and good place to leave it off. You can find it on YouTube and his entire presser if you want to hear the rest of it. But I think you got the gist of it there. Resources, a big conversation there, roster retention, which is probably sounds good for BYU and Utah fans. Ideally, Michigan has the type of talent that they don't need to pick Utah and BYU entirely clean, but inevitably I think there's going to be some attrition when it comes to these two rosters, especially if Jay Hill and Jason Beck do end up being the 2 coordinators for Michigan. We'll talk a little bit more about that coming up next before we wrap up the show. Stick around. Jake and Ben, 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.
Two amigos on the airwaves, talking sports. They got him and Jason on soul. Loves his tie-dye, Ben's got style with his scarf. Oh my.
Jake and Ben, 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone. What a bizarre week we are heading into. Utah has a bowl game coming up on Wednesday. We will be on the air. We'll both be carrying the bowl game, if I understand correctly, and we'll have your pregame show leading up to it. I'll be doing my normal 10 to noon, and then Hans and Scotty will be taking over for some of the pregame leading up to 1:30 when the bowl game officially kicks off. So excited for that, and Hans and Scotty are still coming up next with a fully loaded show with obviously all the breakdown on what has happened over the last 96 hours and what's coming up next for Utah and for BYU. One thing we know for sure is this is going to be 2 totally different programs going into next season. And even Josh Furlong, who joined us coming up at 11 o'clock earlier today, mentioned the idea of A-Rod potentially leaving BYU for Utah. I mean, one way or another, we were going to see a lot of turnover. Certainly roster-wise, we know Utah's entire offensive line was going to be switched over, and Utah was going to have a new head coach. I don't think we expected Utah to have a new offensive coordinator. Obviously needed a new defensive coordinator. BYU might need at least 1 new coordinator and maybe 2 new coordinators. Truly unprecedented time here at Utah, and it's amazing that this could have been even crazier had Kalani Sitake taken the Penn State job, which now feels like ancient history and was only 2 weeks ago now at this point when on this Monday the news was breaking that Kalani was in very serious conversations to take the Penn State job. Obviously that didn't happen, but just opened the door for further fallout down the line. Other interesting news today, USC's defensive coordinator took the D coordinator job at Penn State. I know there'd been some conversation of maybe Sean Nua could step in and replace Jay Hill at BYU if that was the case. He's obviously going to be a candidate either to go to Penn State or maybe get the USC D-line or a D coordinator job. So the movement really, truly never stops. We have been at a real luxury in the state of Utah to have Kyle Whittingham for 20-plus years and Kalani now for 10 as the head coaches here. And the fact that they brought such winning cultures and continuity to these two programs that are so important to our state. So losing out on Witt's going to mean a major change. And Morgan Scalley has huge shoes to fill going forward. We'll see how well he's able to do it. Very excited to hear what Hans and Scotty have to say about it coming up next. Christian, thanks so much for booking out the show today. We'll be back with you tomorrow at 10 o'clock. Stick around. Hans and Scotty, 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.